All right, I wanted to talk to you guys for a minute about composition and design. Composition and design is all about taking objects or actual things such as landscape, portrait, still life, and placing them in a space, in an artwork, so that they look nice and they balance. Okay? So I've got three designs up here. And I did them this way because project number one is going to be done very similar to this, and we'll talk about that when we get to project one. But the first design right here, I've got squares. Now some of those squares run off the page, but they're still squares. You can just see part of it sticking out. You have to have an interesting positive spaces. That's the squares themselves, how they're placed in the picture plane, and interesting negative spaces, which would be the white space. Okay, if you look at the squares, the way they're placed, it's an interesting placement. If you also look at the negative space, the white space, it also has an interesting look to it. The other thing we have to have is balance. So if I cut this down the middle, right down through here, is there enough shapes or partial shapes on this side of the picture plane to balance what is on this side of the picture plane? So the right needs to balance with the left. And in this case, yes, it does. It makes a very good composition. Now the middle one, same thing applies. Interesting spaces, which is the squares, and interesting negative spaces, which is the white space. Are both of those interesting? Yes, they are. And if you cut it down the middle, are there enough things on the right-hand side to balance out the left-hand side? And the answer is yes, it is. So 1 and 2 are both good compositions. Now, if you look at number 3 over here, the squares are less dynamic in the way they're placed. The other two, they're on angles, and they're really taking up big amounts of space. Number 3 has some smaller squares in it, and they're more in a regular placement as far as being the flat side on the bottom and the sides, and then the other flat side on top. But they are still placed in an interesting manner, and the white space is still interesting. Now, does it balance? If you cut it down the middle, right down through here, is there enough things on the right-hand side to balance off what's on the left-hand side? And once again, yes, there are. So it also is a good composition. Now let's take a look at these down here. Number 1 down here, this one. The squares are in a very dynamic position. They're interesting, but they're all kind of to the left. So it's left side heavy. And then the white space is interesting in this part, but the rest of it's not very interesting. It's just kind of open space. If we divide it down the middle, like I said before, everything is pretty much over here. There's almost nothing over here. So as far as balance goes, it's not balanced. It's left side heavy. So in this particular case, the composition is not very good. Now take a look at the middle one right here. There are squares in the middle. There's a square in the middle, and there are 2 sets of squares above and below. Are they balanced in this particular instance? Yes, they are. If you cut it down the middle right here, there are enough things on the right to balance off what's on the left. However, the negative space, the white space out here, is not very interesting. Even though it's balanced, the white space is not very interesting, so it's not a good composition. There needs to be more things there. And then take a look at the last one over here. The squares are kind of randomly placed. They're not very dynamic as far as the way they look. They're all small. They're not taking up much space. And the white space around them is not very dynamic either. It doesn't look very good. It's just kind of open space. If you cut it here down the middle, The balance is not very good either. So this also is not a very good composition. Looking at the whole thing, hopefully you can see the ones up top are much better than the ones at the bottom, and that's what we want for your project. One is for you to have nice positive and negative spaces, and that's what composition and design is all about.